Texas. A little town, about 800 people. More, probably you would almost call it northeast central Texas is almost how you'd have to put it. And I had this gentleman who had grown up there. He was a native of Normandy, but traveled extensively with Ma Bell back in the day. And then when he retired, he came back, and he wasn't really a church-going person since his younger days. But I really got to know him through 2 or 3 other people that every morning about 6:30, 7 o'clock, I would go down to this one little old store in that community, and I could sit down and have coffee with a few folks and know everything that happened during the night, and who's sick, who I needed to go see, who I didn't want to go see. And I got to meet him there, and we'd drink coffee and do this and that. So he started coming to church, and he finally one Sunday, he said, "You know, Ken," he said, "years ago I did move my membership." He said, "Can we quietly move my membership back? I don't want to say anything." I said, "Yeah, we'll take care of it." So we did that. And so then, here we came to Holy Week. And sometime before that, he was in a group of people, and they said, "Well, what are you going to be doing?" I said, "Well, we're going to do foot washing." And I said, I need somebody to come up and let me wash their feet. And all of a sudden he says, "You know what? I'll do that." He said, "I need that." And he came up that night, and I washed his feet, which was the biggest shock in the world to the congregation. And that man became one of the most active people in that church. I tell you, to this day, I am just so amazed, okay? So amazed. So yes, foot washing should be a part of that service.
We did that once here, and it was a small group, but it was, you'd be surprised how meaningful it turned out to be.
It is one of the most...
When Billy was here.
Yeah, it's one of the most, to me, one of the most wonderful acts of humility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's humility on the part of the person who's willing to show off their wacky feet. And humility on the person who is doing it, who has to kneel and bow down and actually, in a way, show obeisance to this other person.
We did a whole group. Everybody did it.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see y'all this morning, and I hope everyone's doing well. I will preface our gathering this morning with the fact that, yes, we do have 3 memorial services coming up. Tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, Barbara Long's service, and Billy Steele and I will be sharing that service. Just delightful people. And out of that, it looks like sometime early next year, there will be a great grandchild of Barbara's that I'll be baptizing. So, these kind of things happen. Then, of course, Saturday at 10:30, is it? Yeah, 10:30, we have Pat McDonald's service. And then Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, we have Darlene Roberts' service here at the church. And after that, nobody's allowed to die for a while. I do think, was it Mr. Robinson that passed away recently?
Yes.
Is that his name?
Yes.
I think we're looking early January with the family to do something there.
When we lived in Mexico, these guys used to have coffee every morning at the stand on the side of the road. And they had this thing, they said, when somebody dies, 3 people die. And so they stopped going to the little coffee place until that 3rd person, because they didn't want to be number 2 or 3.
That tradition even continues here. You'll hear people say, like, especially if it's a movie star or a political person, somebody well known, they'll be able to say, well, there'll be 2 more pretty soon, you know.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, okay. So anyhow, that's where we are, so let's begin. God, I just thank you for these few weeks we've had together to look at and to involve ourselves in a particular journey. And Lord, today as we come to the close of this particular part of the journey, just remind us that this is really only the beginning of the journey. We are all your children. Oh, how you so love us all. And there is nothing that will ever separate any of your children from you, Lord. And so today, as we come to this place where the head meets the heart and the heart meets the feet of the journey, just simply remind us, you love us all so much. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we have had a journey. And I do put it, in my mind, I put it in kind of a 3-step process. Of course, it did begin with this the front page. These little books don't hold up too well. That's the way I use them, I guess. But we began with this thing where he had said on the bottom of page Roman numeral 7, but I had not been in the room with these good and godly folks very long before I realized that I was not there to tell them my story. I was there to listen to theirs. And so it began. I love that. So, I go back to that. So it began. And we started out with head stuff, didn't we? I mean, when you think about it, the first couple of chapters, well, really, yeah, the first 3 chapters really have dealt with head issues. This whole thing of understanding of past history, the whole thing of how hermeneutics plays into it, and then that whole thing of the passages, the scriptures that mean so much to, especially I think to the more conservative people, because that's the only place they can hang their hat is on 5 biblical scriptures. And so we've traveled that road. But today I think we move from the head to the heart and then to the feet. And I think, as this writer, as Steve Harper points out, unless theology moves from the head to the heart and to the feet, it's nothing but cold orthodoxy. So much of the doctrines of any denomination or any church sadly become instruments of the head only. It is the doctrine that becomes the critical mass and not the people who are living out the faith to which they're called. I grew up in, again, a very, very, you'd say, fundamentalist little denomination. And we had a church covenant that hung on the wall of the church. And every Wednesday night in worship, we would read that covenant. That covenant was a head thing. Because it talked about, we believe in that God, ex nihilo, created all things and did it in 6 days. Okay? We believe that. We believe that the Bible is literally true, down to every jot and tittle of the King James Version. We believe that. And when I was ordained, I was not asked about how I live my faith. I was simply asked, you do believe that, don't you, Brother Arch? And the way the question was asked, and I think I've shared this, the way the question was asked, it's like, you better say yes, or you're not going to be ordained. And so already in my mind, I'm like, okay, so I'll play this game because this is the denomination I'm in and this is how I've been raised. And so I played the head game until the day came in my life when I said, I can't do that anymore. Because it's got to come here. Yes, there are, and I don't like the word doctrine personally, there are biblical constructs that we humans have developed that I adhere to in the head, and I seek to live them out through the heart. And living them out through the heart means I get up and I live them in my feet, I walk it. You know, that whole thing, it's not, can you just talk it, but can you walk the walk? And folks, it is true, a lot of us do really good talking faith. And so last Sunday, in each service, I kind of came to an answer. You know, I kept asking y'all, and different ones of you have shared with me, and I kept asking, okay, how can I best go about this? And then it was put to me by more than one person. Ken, you know, probably our church is at the place where people's minds are pretty much made up. And whether it's this study or any other study on this, you're not going to change anybody's minds. So Ken, why don't you just let us know where you are with this and how you want to lead us. And then let's just go. Because that's what you've been doing anyhow, right? You've been open, you've been accepting, you've been welcoming. And I think that probably a very good majority of the church would also accept the affirming part of that thing. And so that's why I did what I did Sunday. And I have not received any negative emails or nasty phone calls. But as I was standing at the door after one service, with people standing around, my associate being one, and 4 or 5 others, a person walks up and says, you know, we don't agree on a whole lot, and sometimes you're just a pain in the ass. But I love you. Okay. And I'm standing there, and I said, yeah, you're right, we don't agree on a lot of things, but I kind of lied when I said I loved him. at the moment. And then later, that, you know, okay, you know, those kind of things, believe it or not, do happen to preachers. And Florine came up to me before the next service. He came up, he says, Ken, did I hear what I thought I heard? I said, about what? He said, that person said, you're a pain in the ass, and then said they loved you. I said, you heard right. I don't relish any time someone says that to me, privately or publicly, but I can deal with it better privately. When someone just does that in front of other church members, I'm sorry. That to me is something that is just not acceptable. And so I heard that. But it hasn't, you know, to me it just kind of said, hey, Bubba, you're on the right track. So I'm sharing that to say, for me, this journey has gone from my head, it's been in my head a long time, But here in this church, it really has become a thing of the heart and the feet. And I really wish that people who might think differently would at least consider me open enough to listen to them. I'm not going to move in that direction. But to come and sit down and say, okay, let's talk about how you get there, Ken, because, you're a pain in the you know what. And part of the reason I went ahead Sunday and just used a few moments to do that was the bishop in the conference that I'm officially a member of, the Texas Annual Conference. After our Western jurisdiction came out with this recent kind of statement, which I totally agree with, and Bishop Hoshibata, along with all the other bishops in the Western jurisdiction, said, okay, here we are. The bishop back in the conference used this in a letter to all of the members of the Texas Annual Conference, of which I'm one, so therefore I got the email. And he used what the bishops in the Western jurisdiction has said out here as a way to say, look, see, here's just another sign of the corruption and the moral failure of the church. And I'll be honest, that ticked me off. And out of that, all of a sudden, a light bulb went off in my head. I'm a member of the Texas Annual Conference. Now, it's very unlikely that I will be charged for anything but between January the 1st and whenever that happens. But the reality is, if I were to be charged, guess where I would have to go to face charges? I'd have to go back to Texas. So I sent that whole thing to Bishop Hoshibata and to Mark and 5 or 6 other clergy that I know well in DSs. And one of them says, Ken, you mean you haven't joined the conference out here? And I wrote it back and I said, Texas Conference won't allow me to, simply because I'm in retired status. And as far as they're concerned, once you're in retired status, you don't really matter anymore. So they won't transfer you unless probably you get really pushed. And probably after May, I may not even have to worry about it anyhow, because whatever goes, we'll be going with the Western jurisdiction and with our conference. I don't see us going anywhere else. And so, hope that kind of, okay? Yes?
I have a question. I wasn't here on Sunday. What did you do or say?
Okay, I have a lanyard that I wear, which is I picked it up in Kansas City. It's a reconciling movement lanyard, the reconciling movement. You're familiar with that, okay. And so I was wearing it, and so I just simply said, with everything going on basically, I just want you to know that with what the Western jurisdiction has presented, that I fully concur with it. And therefore, being pastor of this church, I want you to know that I am fully welcoming, accepting, and affirming, and I wear this lanyard with pride. And it is my goal to lead this church to being a fully, which I think we already are, a fully inclusive congregation. We got a few folks that just don't get it, but we already do that, right? And that we will be with the Western jurisdiction and the Southwest Desert Conference in whatever direction we wind up going. And I said, and if you disagree with that, feel free to come see me, okay? And that's what I said. I got a little applause at 8 o'clock because I wasn't fully awake yet. I got a heavy applause at 9:30. Now, 11 o'clock service, I don't know if they were taking their snooze, but
Yeah.
it wasn't, they're just a more quiet group, but anyhow, so that's kind of where all that is. And I feel good about it because now I don't have to preach about it theoretically, I don't have to say anything about it. I will give updates as to maybe what things are going on in the larger, for instance, the Western athletic, the Western, the WAC, the conservative group, they've been meeting, they already have a tentative book of discipline. I mean, they've been at this for years, okay? They've got a tentative book of discipline. Now, how that touches this, okay, because it's this thing that's kind of been the jelly and the whole thing, right? They have, tentatively, they have their statements of faith. Number one, so far, they have no social principles. And I'm not surprised. Boy, some of that group, they have hated the social principles for years, okay? So there probably won't be that. But in their statements of faith, they mention, they really go big on that. They're open to all, that all people, male, female, that all people can come and join the church, be a full member of the church, and can participate in everything. They got that, okay, they say that. And then they do mention that, that as far as ordination, they just simply, they would require that there be fidelity in marriage and celibacy and singleness. But guess what's missing? Nowhere in their statements yet, is there any word about homosexuality being at odds with Christian scriptures. I like that thought. Now they may change that later, but in my mind, kind of makes sense, because when you, maybe two things here in my stinking thinking. One is, when you join one of those churches, whatever direction they choose to go, you already know that these are churches where a gay person will not be ordained a clergy. So they don't put that there. The other thing may be they want to appear to be open to everybody, and so they don't say that, but then when some gay person who's been in the church for 10 years hears the call to ministry, and they go see the preacher, and then the preacher's going to say, but we can't do that. So they got some kind of sneaky stuff, I think, going on. And so when I saw all that, I said, that's so wrong. They want to come back to the head thing. They want to be known as being orthodox. John Wesley was not an orthodox theologian or preacher. He was Anglican, and he was pretty open in that. But I don't see John Wesley as having been what we would call orthodox. He was Arminian. And Arminian means that he was very much free will, okay? As opposed to the Calvinism that was a part of his day and has become a part of what we deal with in churches too, okay? So that does bring me to this as we come to this last chapter, because it's not about the head. Yeah, it is. It is and it isn't. It's more than the head. It's got to move, what is it, 18 inches? Some of us with a little, it's got to move maybe a little further. But it's whatever it is that we hold about faith has got to become a part of our life and our being. And that's why I like it when he called this chapter life. I'm just going to hit some high points and we can talk as we go, okay? And I do think the final questions really do get to the heart of it. But I hope that what I've shared with you is kind of setting the stage for this, okay? he mentions right off the bat.
What page are you at?
I'm on page 49. Yes, 49. Wesley really brought to life that whole thing about experience. A lot of folks in a lot of faith traditions experience it on a real back burner because, again, it's matters of the head that are more important. And there are people who really love to be told what to believe, and they go home from church happy because they don't have to worry about it. The preacher's told them how to live, right? What to believe. And that takes care of everything. And John Wesley would totally disagree with that because he believed in what is called practical divinity, which is experiential divinity. He said it's where everything must come, otherwise we're left with a theoretical theology, a dangling doctrine, and a dead orthodoxy, which I've been talking about. So, moving into life, he says, I must write as an advocate and as an ally. I am an ally with them in their quest for full inclusion in the church. I'm so glad to hear Steve Harper write that. Because I've shared, for years, he was not there. And I'm coming to believe it's a rare breed like him and even myself who have grown up in a more conservative to even fundamentalist setting to make that journey. Anna Maria Rizzuto, a Freudian neuropsychiatrist, wrote a book one time called The Birth of the Living God. A lot in there I probably wouldn't buy, but one of the things that stuck with me, she said, the first 5 years of our life go a long way in creating within us that which out of we spend the rest of our lives either affirming or going to battle to become different. And that does make sense. I remember the old saying was in the Roman Catholic Church, give us your child for 5 years and they'll never be anything but a Catholic. Well, it was pretty much that way in the Missionary Baptist Church where I grew up. You give us your child and boy, and I see people like that all the time in life that it's a head trip, okay? It's a head thing. So Wesley said we need to become an ally for full inclusion. And the rest of this chapter envisions readers who either, and I like this vision, who either are or seek to become advocates and allies for these who are God's children. And he raises the question, in light of that, how then do we live? He's moving from the head to the heart to the feet. And it's kind of like in my sermon Sunday, I'm preaching on from Thanksgiving to Thanks-living. Thanksgiving is a lot of head stuff, okay? And I don't want to preach it to y'all because then you might not come to church. But a little bit of this may show up there, simply because it is at the heart of what it is to live a thankful life. And so he says, first, we must live in relationship with these people. And Walter Brueggemann, of course, he says on page 50, and I love this, he spoke of how relationships are necessary for creating theological imagination, which he means by turning text into life. You get it out of relationships. So much of my preaching comes from the stories in Scripture that are relational stories. Comes from living everyday life, which is about relationships. It's not just preaching some theoretical, highbrow belief thing, but it's literally about out of relationships, how does that affect my life? It could be for me as simple as one evening I'm walking down the aisle of a church, and this lady sitting there by her child. I don't know what the child had been doing, but she stopped me and she says, "Preacher, will you tell my child that if he doesn't stop acting up, you're going to get him and God will get him too?" And I looked at her, I said, "Shame on you." And boy, she was like, I said, "Don't ever tell that child that God and the preacher will get him," because I said, then your kid's going to grow up and never go to church again and will hate preachers, because he'll only see preachers and God as the big divine person up in the sky who's going to just kind of get all over you. Boy, she looked at me. But all these years later, I can share that because it was a momentary relationship. But boy, it really touched life. She wanted just to dwell up there in this big theological realm where there is this God and preachers are kind of like God, and your job is to beat people up when they're bad. And we do still a lot of it. And I let her know, no. I want that child to love me. Because I think in loving me, and me loving that child just might say, maybe Pastor Ken expresses love the same way God does, but mine's much more limited, especially if you tell me I'm a pain in the But anyhow, so okay so far? Any comment at this point? I don't want to keep y'all butt in on me. Raise your hand, do something. Butt in, do whatever, okay?
Well, I have,
Yes.
you just made me think of something.
Yeah.
In raising my kids, I never, ever told them that they had to behave because they were the preacher's kids.
Right.
Never said that to them.
There you go.
They were like everyone else.
You've heard that old story probably, right? Where the person comes up and is complaining about the preacher's kids. The preacher says, "Well, it's really weird because, the only kids my kid has to play with is the lay people's kids." And boy, when you use that in a sermon, all of it, you get a few chuckles, but the chuckles are kind of nervous chuckles. Yeah, okay, yeah. But, and on that, Helen's children were close to grown. One was basically grown. The other two were older teenagers and had their own mindsets. But the two we adopted, I have never said anything to Kenneth or Katie. I've never said to them anything other than, you were born God's child, and you are God's child. You don't really have to be saved. All you have to do is love God and live for God, because you belong to God. No matter how bad. And boy, when Katie Sue hit puberty, oh Lord. See, she was born crack cocaine fetal alcohol. And when you hit puberty, she was doing really well until puberty came along. But anyhow, she still, and I love her, and I say, Katie, you'll always be God's child like you'll always be my child. I may not like some of the things you do, but it'll never keep me from loving you and accepting you. And I really, so I like that. Okay. So we have to have these relationships. He does talk about how he has gotten to know people who are as devoted to Christ as anyone can. I read this and I'm like, why is it? And I understand where it's coming from. But why is it we have to use that argument well, so-and-so loves God as much as anyone. You know, I've had to use that in my own defense. Yeah. Like, you know, I've had people, simply because of maybe a political stance I've taken, I've had people just say, well, you wouldn't be where you are if you were a real Christian. And I have to come back and say, wait a minute, you mean I have to defend my Christian integrity based on what you think I ought to be? And so I kind of struggle with this in here, okay? That anybody should have to struggle. I think it ought to be the people who are in opposition to gays. It ought to be the people who are in opposition to whatever out there in our Methodist church. It ought to be them that have to explain why it is they prohibit this love. Okay. Second, we must live as lifelong learners with respect to sexuality. You know, he gets into a thing here that, you know, I had not thought of. And I still have some, I'm going to say, okay, Steve, let's sit down and talk about this thing. I have mentioned that, and I have heard, and I still hear people who are of the gay, not lifestyle, but of the gay,
Persuasion.
not even persuasion, gender. Okay, yeah, gender. I've heard some of them who say, well, I was born this way. And he's saying now that studies are showing that that's kind of antiquated, that it's more now, it may be based more now on things that are going on in the mind and in the brain in our development. I still think it could be both. I'm not ready, based on what they're saying today, to throw out the idea that it is something that you could be born that way, okay? So I kind of struggle with that. He says the allegation that gender identity is fixed at birth and presented anatomically is simply not a fact. I would say, wait a minute, Steve. I have some issues with that. And there's going to always be studies, you know, that point to, and it may well be that for some persons who are gay, that their awakening comes later in life. But to me, that doesn't negate the fact that quite possibly they've been created that way. But it's coming, you know, just like in my own journey in life about different things. You know, I've come to know more who I am. And probably it's been there all along, but it just needed maybe the proper situation, environment, in order for it to be freed up, to be allowed to be evident. So, and that's all I'm going to. Does anybody have anything to say about that? Yeah, okay, you're first.
It doesn't hurt to take any study with a grain of salt, because study will show this, and then it'll show
That's
that
true.
with this, and,
Yeah,
you know, so.
yeah,
That's
good
it.
point, good point. Yes, and we do, yes.
And different people have different situations at different times.
Yes.
And to me, I consider that uniqueness. I consider
yeah,
that that's
sure.
very special.
Yeah.
I have friends who are gay, and for many of them, they have actually gotten married, had children, they thought they were very happy, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
I mean, and then they have to make the tough decision of what's gonna happen now. You know, they have families that, you know, it's just devastating.
It is.
It's very, very difficult. And then you have other people who say, I knew when I was in grade school, and so did all the other little children, because they picked on me all the time.
Yes.
So see, it varies from individual to individual, so you can't put everybody in a certain category,
Right.
because they don't, that's not the way
That's
it
right.
works.
I do agree in the footnote where it says gender identity is in the brain. There's no doubt it's in the brain. That much I can accept, okay? My identity is in my brain. But that doesn't mean that identity is going to be necessarily crystal clear, because of the environment in which I'm raised has an awful lot to do. I was who I was because of that environment, and yet I struggled against that environment at some point in my life. And I've come to know, to some degree, at least for today, who I really am. So, that part makes sense, okay?
At the bottom of page 51, that last sentence there.
Yep.
Whether we like it or not, those of us who are older have grown up with views about sexuality that younger people do not hold.
Yeah.
So time, I mean, I read time into that over a period of time,
Mm-hmm.
those who may be gay can see themselves differently at certain points in life.
Now, Carolyn, the other thing, and I like what you brought up, that, and I had that underlined. In our night session, we have a young lady, I guess she's still a teenager maybe, who's coming at night. And I love this because, let me tell you, a lot of our younger people, I mean, I'll be honest, I kind of shudder when I listen to some of the things. You know, it's not a matter of just saying that a person can't be gay, but they kind of look at other things out there, even some of the sexual acts and stuff, that, you know, it doesn't matter to them. It's fine. Okay, you know, and they don't go around picking these battles that we pick about gender issues and all. It's, you know, in fact, I loved it listening to her when she was talking about being at some of the pride parades. And the crap they have to put up with when they're just out there expressing who they are. And these people are over there spitting on them and throwing stuff at them, and, you know, but, you know, and I think she mentioned even, you know, again, what we would call more maybe polygamous situations that, you know, okay, in the Old Testament is no big deal. And that was some of these kids, it's not a big deal. The only problem she had, she said, is that polygamous situations are always, it's the man who has the many wives, not a woman having many husbands. Okay, so, but that just points out, these kids, they're on a whole different wave. Now, granted, she's in an environment here where she can be very open. But I'm thinking about Jerry Falwell's school and his environment out there at Liberty University, where it is totally the opposite. You know, you have to have, almost, if you're a guy, you have to have a certain kind of a haircut. You got to be able to see ears and all this. And, you know, just, well, it comes down to race, gender, and everything else out there. I mean, the conservatism is so, well, it's like it was when I went to the Baptist College. We weren't allowed to hold hands with girls. I mean, if you held a girl's hand, I guess they figured you could get pregnant doing that. And of course we couldn't dance. You know, they had all these things. And so when your nature was to hold hands with the girl you liked, when you got a chance, go out behind a brick building and kiss her, then all of a sudden you've got all these guilt feelings that, you know, God's going to just haul off and slap you, you know, because you're evil. And I mean, you know, so you do have young adults who have grown up in that environment, and they are forbidden to even consider this young lady's environment.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I encourage her to look at all environments, to be open. So anyhow, yeah, so wow.
Well, I'm a graduate of Asbury
I know.
University.
And they were kind of conservative.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
We were not allowed to speak to a boy off campus. You meet him downtown, you couldn't talk to him.
yeah.
When Bill and I were engaged, I used to play the piano at his church. He was pastoring a church,
Yeah.
and I was the pianist. But I wasn't allowed to go there with him, and I wasn't allowed to be with him off campus at all. And so our last quarter, I didn't dare go to his church anymore
Yeah.
because I would get kicked out of school, and I was ready to graduate. So I couldn't even go to his church.
Yeah.
on
Surely
Sundays.
You couldn't talk to a boy in church?
Not off campus.
Not on campus.
Oh,
And we weren't allowed to talk after 6:15, you couldn't talk to a boy.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
Even
see?
on campus.
Yeah, see, it's, yeah,
This was Asbury University where this author, he was at the
yeah,
seminary.
yeah.
And
And
I was
there,
married at the seminary. I mean, it was ridiculous. I could go on and on about those.
and there are still
Mhm.
schools in America, Christian schools, where these kinds of things still, I mean, really, okay?
uh-huh.
So if you think, if that is where they are, God only knows where they are with people who have genderization things going on, okay? Yeah, all right. Yeah. And,
Even some couples got married just so they could be together, but they were not allowed to hold hands on campus, even the married couples.
Yeah, I went to a Methodist college, and my cousin went, and we couldn't show up and couldn't ride from home to
Yeah.
school together.
yeah, yeah.
And once got close to the campus.
Amazing, okay. So anyhow,
Well, I found the Methodist church late in life.
yeah, okay, yeah, all right.
We've changed it a little bit.
Yeah. Then, and I do like this, he says, with all this other head stuff going on, to ignore them, talking about gay folk, or to allege that they are under the influence of fallen world thinking is blatantly wrong. See, now here's the whole thing. Being gay is sinful in and of itself because it is a result of the fall, you know, Adam and Eve. When they ate the fruit, then if I'm gay, then that to a lot of these people, because they'll just flat call you, oh well, you're an abomination to God, because who you are, not what they're not even talking about what you're doing, just the fact that you will admit that you're gay shows that you are a fallen creature. So therefore, they have every right to not accept you and to reject you. But if you can get that fallenness out of it and deal with it from the standpoint that all of God's creation was good, even after Adam and Eve ate the fruit, that it's still a good creation, that then you can be, but they won't move from that. The fall, the original sin is the litmus test. It's that
Stake in the ground.
stake in the ground. This is it. The fall is it.
Wouldn't everybody be fallen?
Oh yeah, we're all fallen, but some of us are more fallen. That's the only way I can, because we've looked at the list and we've looked at all the 22 different groups that are mentioned or actions of people that, I can be a liar. I can be a Christian and be a liar, and that's acceptable in the church, but you can't be gay and be in church, because obviously you're falling worse than I'm falling. Okay? Yeah.
Don't you think it's a little freakish that people are so concerned with other people's sexuality?
I do, sure, I do. But isn't this the history of humanity almost? Look here in America, we are still freakish about race. I mean, it is still a big, big deal. Come January, we will have Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I pastored not that many years ago. I pastored a Methodist church where this one guy on SPRC, every year, when we would sit down and go over, kind of the bylaws for the staff and all, every year that he would bring up the deal, he'd say, are we really going to put Martin Luther King Jr. Day down as a holiday for the church? And finally, I just looked at him and said, well, you know, if we don't, then you're going to go have to talk to these 4 people who are black, who are in our church. You're going to have to go tell them why we're not going to do that. And I said, even if you as SPRC, if you voted that that would not be a holiday, as senior pastor, it's going to be a holiday. And if it's that bad for you, then you can get a new pastor. And I just flipped, hey, because I believe in the value of every human being. And I hate it that we talk about people in terms of gay and straight. I mean, we probably got as many varieties of straight people as we got gay people. We just don't know that. But do we go outside of WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, outside of, for those of us who are, quote, heterosexual, we don't have all of these things where people refer to us. I think it'd be great sometimes if a gay preacher got up and had a list of all the identities of heterosexual people. Golly Moses. But I get that point. I totally agree. And yet, I'm speaking of a clergywoman who, when she's in a meeting, she just almost rants and raves about all these identities and how we heterosexuals, we have to get the nomenclature right, And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm accepting, I'm open. Yeah, I may not get afraid, but see, with her, it's very important. If somebody leaves, for instance, if you say LGBTQ, wait a minute, you left the IA plus off.
Why does there have to be? I mean, I'd rather there just be an L club, I don't want to have the G's and the T's and everybody else in my club.
Yeah.
There's got to be heterosexuals and then everybody, all the other freaks in the world, you go over here.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you know how you felt when a person said to you that you were pain but loved you anyway? That infers there's something terribly wrong with you, and you're much inferior to him.
Yes, I am. Yeah, that's really what he's saying.
So as people say, well, okay, you're gay, but we love you anyway. No, thank you.
Yeah. And we'll get to that, because that love thing, that love thing is not simple, is it? And we'll get there in a little bit. Okay, thank you. That point is well taken. And he does right here. He says, third, he talks about, that we need to continue to be lifelong learners with respect to a theology of sexuality. But I think to do it in such a way that, golly, if we could somehow get away from all the nomenclature stuff. Third, we must live as nonviolent resistors to those who spread misinformation, and worse, whose words and actions do harm to other people. And see, I would say that about any person. Of course, here we're dealing with the sexuality thing. I would say that about people with reference to race, with reference to being poor.
Mhm.
Look how we Christians demean the poor. I just find it inconceivable that you can have a Christian politician who wants to take food off the table of single again mothers or single mothers and children. I'm sorry. I look at that and say, wait a minute. Didn't Jesus say, you visited me when I was in prison, you visited me you fed me when I was hungry. But a lot of people, that they want to ignore those parts of the gospel, okay? So, but I do think that we do have to be nonviolent resistors. I am so thankful for Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and a whole host of other folks who were always being pressed to become violent, but who refused, because they knew that violence begets violence. Sure, being nonviolent opens us up to being harassed and beaten up and imprisoned, all kinds of stuff, right? But it is the way to be. Jesus was nonviolent. If it seems I am weary of those Christians who attempt to exonerate themselves with an I love you, but, yeah, I am. No, I am fed up with that. I love you, Ken, but. We preachers, we're always hearing people say, well, I like that sermon, but. I agree with you, but. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I really do think that we can learn from people who disagree with us. But when you attach love to it, to me, that's a whole different thing. To say, I love you, but. In this accidental or intentional milieu, page 53, nonviolent resistance is called for. By realizing this, I had to educate myself through the writings of those who have engaged in these in the past. Bonhoeffer, Gandhi, Merton, Day, Thurman. I know all of these folks. And then he lists some whole new people and who have preached a non-violent means of being able to show Christian love. On page 53 in the middle, we must live in this society and in the church as nonviolent resistors against deformative theologies and against harmful efforts to denigrate, marginalize, and oppress. I was talking with a person, and this person actually tried to sell me on why, slavery was a good thing. Why did we need to destroy slavery when we could have Christianized it better and made it better for people? Wow. Yeah. And people come up with all the good reasons in the world to continue to marginalize people.
Full employment, they called it.
Huh?
100% employment, they called it.
Yeah, 100% employment. Yeah. And look at the people that today in our nation who are being marginalized. It's not just gay people. It's women. It's people with disabilities. Helen and I have lived with that ever since the day Ken Jr. was injured. From the very moment that a woman walked into our hospital room and began trying to make Kenny, who had just turned 4 in the hospital, he can no longer, he's awakened to a world totally different than it was the very moment before the bullet struck his brain. But he's awakened to a world where all of a sudden his left arm doesn't work, he can't walk at the present because his left leg is partially paralyzed. He's got all these things going on. And this woman comes in, and she's one from one of the rehab things. She comes in and says, okay, I want you to put your shirt on. I want you to do this. I want you to put your socks on. And I got mad as hell. I really did. And I looked at her and said, why are you, well, you know, with his disabilities, he's going to have to work twice or 3 times as hard in life to achieve and to become accepted. And I said, ma'am, we no longer need your services. We refuse to raise him with that kind of initiative, that in order for him to be someone who contributes into society, he's going to have to do things and work 2 or 3 times harder than other people. Really? Mm-mm-mm. So I understand about all this prejudice and marginalization and everything. And I forget the gentleman's name who recently wrote the book about America's original sin, which is racism. And Jim Wallace, great read. Get that sometime.
Related to George?
Huh?
Was he related to George?
No, Willis, not Wallace. Willis.
Oh, I thought you said
No, Willis. Wallace, W-A-L-L-I-S, Jim Wallace, W-A-L-L-I-S. Fourth, we must live as promoters of access for all people into all the churches, sacrament, means of grace, and ministries. And he says, and I agree with this, we must declare ourselves as a church that loves all people. That's why, see, I would argue, and I think you're right with me on this, that what we have to clarify is when we say we are fully inclusive, we are fully inclusive, period. It's not just fully inclusive to include gay people. We are fully inclusive. There are churches that are not inclusive of people with disabilities. Number one, they don't build their buildings where a person with disability could get in there. Number two, when the Disability Act was passed, guess who were the big opponents of what would have been the original Disability Act in America? Guess who were the biggest opponents? Churches. Because they knew they would have to go out and spend a bunch of money to revamp their facilities so that people with disabilities could have physical access. And they watered it down, and churches were given a pass for a long time. Now, I think the thing is, now, if you, like we did at Strawberry, when we built a new sanctuary, but they were already, we had very little, but if you go out and build a new sanctuary, then now by law, you have to make the rest of your campus accessible at that time.
Yeah.
But churches fought it. And one of the big reasons were very few people with disabilities attended church. And I think there's a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons was a person with disabilities kind of went against the grain of the fact that Jesus heals. So we don't really want evidence of somebody who hasn't been healed. But what they don't understand is there are a whole lot of ways in which healing takes place. My son, our son, I think even though he has what we call some disabilities, he's a whole person. He is a person within himself. And for me to accept him as anything less, to me, is a sin for me. And I actually had a youth director in one church who, when he became old enough to go to the youth group, she let us know, my wife and I, well, you'll have to have somebody here with him because we're not a disability youth group. Had this not been my son, had it been somebody else's son's church, I would have fired her right on the spot. But this was my son, so I looked at her and I said, you know what? You're going to have to live and learn. in this situation. Oh, I was mad. I really was. Kind of still am at times.
Actually, so.
Okay. And so anyhow, you know, so this whole thing, we've got to work at this thing, you know. We must live, he says, in a society as nonviolent resistors against deformative theologies, and I mentioned that about denigrating, marginalizing, and oppressing, I'm going to say, any person. Fourth, we must live as promoters of access into all of our sacraments and so forth. And we must move beyond affirmation to access. All these people must not only be permitted to attend church and, of course, give their money. I haven't met a preacher yet who's turned down money from a gay man. That was like back in Texas. See, there back where I pastored in Normandy. They raised a lot of racehorses out in the country out there, right? Quarter horses especially. And they would go over to New Mexico, you know, Rio Doce places, and then race them in Houston, wherever. And I had a person say one time, because at that time, all this information would come out about from Christian groups about how do we combat horse racing and gambling in the state of Texas, right? Because it causes prostitution and it causes all it, you know. And so I actually preached and said, you know, we need to come up with some viable arguments if we're going to do this. And so some member later said, well, Ken, you know, Brother so-and-so out here, you know, he raises racehorses and he takes them out to California and they race. And, you know, he said, every now and then it's obvious in our offering that his horses have done well. He said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, the devil's had the money long enough. Maybe it's about time the Lord has it. And I said, what I'm really getting at is, I've never said to anybody, we don't want your money. We won't take your money. Unless it was an obvious thing, you know, if somebody who was in the mafia came in and, you know, of course, you know. But we don't ask people who give an offering, are you gay, or are you straight, or are you black, or are you white? We don't ask that, do we? Oh, but I think it's cute he mentioned that here. And even be members of it. But they must also be invited to give themselves in ministry within the body of Christ, lay and ordained, and they must be allowed to marry in the church just as heterosexual people are. I agree with everything. To me, that's okay. I agree with it. Finally, we must live keeping watch over ourselves as advocates and allies. This is talking about living in love. Folks, it is not easy to live in love. But to me, living in love doesn't mean that I won't disagree with somebody. But I think living in love means that I'm not going to, because I disagree with them, harass them, create lies about them, and all other kind of things that we humans are guilty of doing. Living in love says that in spite of our differences in Christ, you're my brother, you're my sister, and I'll go to bat for you. This thing that we're going through in the Methodist Church, where the one side talks about how the other side treats them, and the other side talks about how the other side treats them. Yes, there are actions that go on all sides of the issues that are horrible. But for me, what I tend to face is is this dynamic that, yes, I've kind of put my pole out here. I stand here. But that doesn't mean I'm not willing to listen and share. But I'm still going to stand here. Now they've got their pole over here, and they stand there. And when I say I'm willing to listen and share, I kind of get the idea they only want to listen and share if I'm willing to make a change to their pole. I'm not expecting them to change from my vantage point. What I am expecting is to continue to live and practice the love of Christ, who when he was spat upon did not spit back. And who said to us when someone says, walk with me a mile, which is required, walk a second mile. Or if somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn the other one, and some guy said, yeah, I've only got 4 cheeks. And when they slap that 4th one, okay? You know, yes, you can kind of tell just look, it's tough. Loving is tough. But that is the mark of a follower of Christ. How will they know we're Christians? By our love. And so for me, the fact that the United Methodist Church, and by the way, the United didn't come because we were united. It came because we joined up with the United Brothers. Yeah, okay. And I don't know that we've ever, as a denomination, been united. I don't know that, by the way, there's over 100 different Baptist denominations in America. So what does that say about being united? Okay. I'm serious. Out of a little town up in East Texas, you have the Bethlehem Baptist Church, the original Bethlehem Baptist Church, and the new Bethlehem Baptist Church, and they're about 3 or 4 miles apart. Okay? And they split over things that have nothing to do with it's over meanness and hatred and anger. And that's why this whole thing about love becomes so much important. God invites us on page 55. God invites us to become more whole within ourselves. He's quoting, and I love this, Ilia Delio. God invites us to become more whole within ourselves so that we may become more whole among ourselves. Evolution toward greater wholeness is evolution toward more life and love. Wow. How about that? But here's the key. You have to become willing to evolve. And our world is full of we people who at some point have said, I've evolved so far, I'm not going any further. And or we have a world full of people who say, I'm not interested in evolving.
My way or the
My way or the highway. I'll take my ball and go home. Yeah. But, you know, this much is clear. As long as the lives of all persons are reduced to an issue, see, and that's where I think you're right on target, okay? As long as I can boil you down to a bunch of letters in the alphabet and make you an issue, it's easy to discount the movement of the Holy Spirit in their lives and therefore maintain a status quo that confers less than and second-class status. And that's anybody. And folks, in order to have power demands having something or someone who has less status. Okay? That's what it's all about. All right. Okay, let's take a quick look at these questions. So we have these recommendations, you know, that and oh, by the way, I like this word in this, and so it continues and all, where he talks just openly, and I love this appendix, I love the appendix, really, where he just says, you are loved, but that's for all people, you're loved. I think it's sad that we have to designate a certain person, but, you know, seriously, I understand why the blacks would say all lives, Black Lives Matter. I understand that. If you are being harassed and if you are being demeaned and your people are being treated horribly, yes, let's take a look at this. Let's look at this for right now. All Black Lives Matter. I have felt the same way about people with disabilities. My wife and I have gone to Austin, Texas, and we have marched in behalf of children with disabilities in the state of Texas. And we truly believe that people with disabilities, that their lives count. Does that mean I don't believe that everybody else? No. But there are moments in time when different groups, different populations, with what's going on is so terrible to them, we have to say their lives count. Look at the immigrants and right now, and all that's going on in these precious children. I have a daughter and son-in-law who think it's just fine that we've done that, because their parents should have known better. Golly Moses. I think it's fine that we say immigrants' lives matter. And I think it's fine to say that blue lives matter for police, military. You know, there are moments in time, I think, like, again, I went to see Midway. And I can only imagine, I was born at the end of that thing. I can only imagine that military lives mattered. And that was on probably posters everywhere to some degree, right? Buy these bonds. They would bring these guys home from World War II and parade them around to help sell bonds. Why? Because the lives mattered. So, yeah. And so when I say all lives matter, I'm not denigrating anybody's life. I think all lives matter. Period. Alrighty, and then of course his little note to non-affirming Christians. I may copy that one and sometime make it available out on the table in the narthex for people to pick up, and to continue to let people know that, there's still hope. Okay? All right. If somebody is non-affirming and yet they stay here in this church and they're with the church, praise the Lord. I'm happy as eating pecan pie on Thanksgiving Day. I'm happy, yeah. Or I would really say back home, I'd be as happy eating a pile of chitlins, so y'all don't even know what that's about, but anyhow. Y'all know what chitlins are? Hog guts. Cleaned out and boiled and then deep fried. Oh my Lord, I got an aunt that's 96 years old. She made the best chitlins in the world.
Pastor, those are chitterlings.
Chitlins? Not where I came from. I call them chitlins. Kind of like chitlins is chitlins.
I'm from the party once for a group, and I cooked chitlins. I cooked hog chows.
Oh no!
I cooked the collards and all the other things. But we put it all on the table, and we didn't tell anybody what it was.
There you go.
They cleaned the table. And then they asked afterwards, well, what was it? Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah.
And that's the principle. If you don't know what it is, you don't argue over it, or you don't
Yeah.
put a label on it. You eat it and you move on.
I have to tell y'all this, and again, at Norman's, you had a rancher who sat up on the side of his bed one morning, was putting his socks on and just fell back dead. And, great family. So we had the memorial and everything. A year later, I get this phone call. His son called me and says, Ken said, here in a couple of weeks, as per Dad's request and his will, he said, we're inviting all the men in the community to come out to the ranch, and we're going to have a crawfish and calf fry luncheon. Y'all probably don't even know what calf fries are either, do you? And so we go out there, and of course got the boiled crawfish, but over here they got this table, and there's a couple of country cowboy chefs over there, and they're cutting up the calf fries. Calf fries are calf nuts. Okay. And they're cutting those up, and then they deep fry them. So man, on my plate I had crawfish, calf fries. Oh man, there's about 100 of us. And then the funny one, the only woman present was his widow, right? And she comes out with the plate, she got a tuna fish sandwich. But, you know, so but anyhow, yeah. But, I don't know how we got into all that. Okay, but those, I hope you've read those, and, you know, feel free to just, if you have somebody and you don't really know how or feel comfortable talking about it, just make copies of this. I think that will just give it to them. And I do like, you know, when he talks about, and this will preach, you are loved. And on page 60, you are loved, immersed in love, covered in love, drenched in love, embraced by love, kissed by love. That's Hesed and agape. It's the welcome home. It's the full inclusion into the family, full access into the house. No spiritual food is denied you. No room is off limits to you. You're home. You're loved. God isn't mad at you. God is madly in love with you. And we can preach that to everybody. So, we've got a few minutes here, which they do kind of in the questions here. They kind of all are somewhat alike. Which recommendations in this chapter are you currently embracing, and what have you learned by doing so? So I'm just going to say, what in this chapter has really touched you?
All means all.
All means all.
I'm gonna remember that for
Yes.
a long, and I will share it with other people.
There you go. All means all.
It means
Amen.
We're
Okay.
either all God's children or we aren't.
There you go. That's right. That's right.
You can spend a lot of time learning from the bibliography in here.
Yeah, he does give a rich bibliography, and some of those footnotes are just so enlightening, okay? Extremely enlightening. Yeah. I think
Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding right now.
I see him kind of as a dream person for me, in that you knowing the circumstances that he taught and ministered in, and now seeing him over here, that's nothing short of a miracle, isn't it? It really is nothing short of a miracle. I think it is for me too, because I grew up in a very exclusive household. We didn't use the word racist, but I know I had family members that were. I had one uncle by marriage who he really thought that the KKK was God's blessing. Yeah.
Lived in the South, you usually found the family member that was one.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But in my journey, for whatever reason, I've always had a yearning to learn more and be more open. And so one day, I've been going from missionary Baptist to Southern Baptist to Methodist, and a person said to me, well, Ken, what's left? He said, you can't be a Catholic priest because you're married. He said, so what else? And he meant it mean. It was a mean thing. He said, what else are you going to do? And I said, whatever the Lord has for me. I'm just going to be open. And that comes back to that thing. How many of us, even though we do put our sticks in the mud, sort of, and say, here we stand, but many of us, we put our stick there in a place that says, we're still open. I don't know everything yet. Okay? Any questions for me then before we go? I've loved this. I hope y'all have. Huh?
I've enjoyed this class. I'm just saddened that more people haven't participated. I think it's only through conversation and getting a better understanding of why people feel so strongly about, on either side.
Yeah.
I think it would make for good conversation because, I'd like to understand, I was born and raised in a small town, Loveland, Colorado, where things were either black or white. And, whether there was gay people or not, I'm sure there were, but nobody ever discussed it. I mean, it just wasn't discussed.
Yeah.
And then I moved to California. And it was truly an eye-opening experience for me, but it was a blessing. It truly was for me. Because I feel that by knowing all different types of people, we are all the same. We were all God's children. And we need to learn to accept that. And until we do, I think that we claim to be good Christians, but we're really not if we do not do that.
That's right.
And so my family is very bad about that, and I have 2 gay nephews. And it just breaks my heart, but I never give up. I go and I fight with them all the time when I go home, in a gentle way. We don't argue or call names or anything like that, but I've just told them, they're Catholic, they consider themselves good Christians. And I said, I'm sorry, but I disagree with your philosophy and your logic because it doesn't make sense. And we all have to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? And I guarantee you, Jesus would be walking with us and with them because that's the right thing to do.
You've really touched something. Remember a few years back, God knows anybody and everybody. They wore the WWJD bracelets, right? Today, from that same genre of Christians, I'm not hearing anything about Jesus. In fact, I sent an email, a Facebook deal to one of my real good friends. He's open like me, but he's got some other of his crony friends who are just really, they're horrible, really. And I sent him this. They're very pro-military, but they're against anything really open. Okay, they're against openness. And I sent him this picture of this young military man who they deposed. I don't remember what day it was. Fine man that they had up in the hearings. And I sent it to my friend. I said, by the way, I said, send this to all of your Christian cronies who are really conservative, and ask them, what would Jesus do? I hadn't heard back. Because it's almost like now. Because you're right. When you do ask, what would Jesus do about the immigrant? Jesus says, well, heck, I was an immigrant. I'm an immigrant I came from heaven to earth to show the way. when I was a baby, my parents had to flee for their lives to Egypt, of all places, just to save me and themselves, probably. You say, I am an immigrant. I know what it's like to be considered an illegal. Herod considered them illegal, right? I mean, this is all, God, Moses, we could keep going, couldn't we? Listen, I have truly enjoyed this. And I'll close with this, about the thing about other people. I know I mentioned it, my good pastor friend up in Phoenix, and Dove of the Desert, George Cushman. George had put together a Bible study, not using this particular book, but using something like it. And the whole thing of people leaving the church had not quite yet hit Dove of the Desert. And he put this study together. And he had talked with people, obviously, who had differences. And he put it together, and he really felt that, yeah, maybe they'll come. No, they never showed up because, okay, Scripture is literal. My stick is right here. You know, the Bible says that I believe it, and that settles it. I've seen that bumper sticker. That's kind of where they are. And so for them to step out of line, that's what they'd be doing. They'd be stepping out of line, and they would become guilty. Okay? They would become guilty. They would be dishonoring God, the church, and everything else if they did that. Because, see, I've had people say to me, well, Ken, for instance, those 5 verses. Well, Ken, if I can't believe what that verse says, then how do I believe the rest of the Bible? Or if you take, like the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which they're not historical chapters, okay? It's you have 2 creation narratives going. You got all this going. They say, well, Ken, if you don't believe that, well, you may as well throw the whole Bible away. And see, and that becomes a very fundamentalist argument. And so getting people who are over there, way far on the right, to even discuss it is almost impossible. Because their whole idea is, we need to be converted. We're not Christian. Okay? I'm not going to say they're not Christian because I believe God loves all. We have some real differences. No, I'm not going to move back to that camp. But at the same time, I would want to so live that hopefully the way I live and act and treat all people, that maybe, you know, from the head to the heart to the feet, maybe by what they see they'll be moved a little. Who knows? I don't know. But folks, we're in the journey, right? We're on the. By the way, Advent and Christmas, I'm doing a series of sermons called The Journey to Christmas. Okay? You won't want to miss it. Maybe I shouldn't say that. So, are we good?
We're good.
May the Lord bless us and keep us and watch over us, and may the Lord continue to fashion us in love in such a way that no one will ever question our love for them. Amen. Amen. All righty.